So far, we have looked at feed up and feedback in this cycle. Now we will move on to feed forward, considering what teachers can do to help students act on the feedback. This triangle represents the AFL framework as described in this 2013 paper by Kelvin Tan. In there, he describes a minimal set of related practices that's required for feedback to enhance learning. Here, the vertical axis represents standards that depicts the Afl Gap. The horizontal axis represents the series of tasks that situates past and future learning, and the feedback is represented by the incline. So standards, task design, and feedback are said to be a minimal set of related practices that's needed for AFL to succeed in the classroom. Let's apply the idea of the AFL framework to the context of teaching essay writing. So let's say from essay 1, the child's actual level of performance is a C+, and the anticipated enhanced learning from the feedback that we give is aimed at helping him improve to a B-. The difference between these two levels is what is known as the AFL gap. So in the task design, there must be opportunity for students to apply the feedback. And Bolt is the one that argues that unless feedback is applied and used to demonstrate improvement, there's no way to tell that it has been effective. Adopting a petrol assessment design enables students to have opportunities to receive feedback as well as to act on feedback. So here, if the complex task is to write a compo of 150 words, we need to break down the task for the student, perhaps getting them to write in paragraph and giving them opportunities to receive peer feedback early on their idea generation and ideas development, and to apply these ideas in developing the story. And finally, as they work towards the final task, they are able to synthesize these feedback comments and act on them. In moving away from the notion of feedback as a one-way communication from the teacher to the student, Gilmore and Associates advocate this three-stage feedback model to make feedback more dialogic. At the preparatory guidance stage, it is akin to what we do at the feed-up stages in helping students understand standards by explaining criteria, discussing task demands, and using exemplars to exemplify the different standards in a rubric. When students are doing the task, they continue to make reference to these standards, and there's opportunities for them to receive peer feedback to shape their ideas. And finally, at the performance feedback stage, after they have done the work, they do get written feedback, which the teacher and the students have opportunities to dialogue over, and it is formative and timely so that they can move towards increasing levels of standards. This is an example of an extended feedback model in the context of primary science. Here, students are taught to use claim, evidence, reason to answer open-ended questions. During the preparatory guidance stage, the teacher first explains what is CER and when best to use that strategy. During the in-task guidance, students first do a guided practice before working on a question independently. During the performance review stage, what the teacher does is to collect students' work to identify appropriate exemplars. Then students rank those exemplars based on standards in a rubric and self-assess their own work against those standards. In same level groupings, whether multi-structural or relational, they work on the next steps that's required. For the feed-forward task, students are given parallel questions to transfer their learning. And such feed-forward opportunities are important to establish that feedback has been effective. This is an example of an extended feedback model in the context of primary math. Here, students are taught problem solving of non-routine questions. At the feed-up stage, the teacher begins by explaining the success criteria and helping students understand solo-informed standards. Students will need to appreciate that at the extended abstract level, it is demonstrated when they can say which heuristic is best and why. Students then work on a non-routine question on their own, after which they work in pairs to peer assess each other's work on the levels of understanding based on solo standards. Then students are put into a mixed group where we have students at the higher solo levels explain their thinking to the larger group. At the end of the day, the teacher consolidates the discussion by inviting 2 or more groups to share and contrast their reasoning on what they agree as the best heuristic. So for the feedforward task, what we have the students do is to work on parallel questions to transfer their learning. I would like to share with you 3 guiding questions in thinking about a more extended feedback design. Think of it as a checklist. Firstly, have you built in multiple feedback opportunities through tasks across a unit of work on a semester or cross grade levels? Have you specified the types of feedback information that will be provided? Would it be with reference to a checklist, a rubric, or exemplar? And who will be providing such information? Would it be through peers, self-assessment, or teacher assessment? And finally, how will information about learner performance be used to influence the redesign of subsequent tasks? Let's consider this notion of a threshold level. If you decide in your mind that only when 80% of the class have understood, then you will go on to the next task or next topic, then 80% is your threshold level. Let's say from task 1, it indicates that only 50% of your class have understood. Then it's a signal for you to consider the redesign of subsequent tasks. Perhaps a task 1.5 is needed before introducing task 2. 1.5 may introduce new scaffolds or breaks a complex task into its smaller component parts to make a difficult concept more accessible. What if from task 1, it reveals that 80% of your students have gotten it, and that's the threshold level you have reached, and you determine that it is good to move on to the next task or topic. One question might be, what do you do with the other 20% of the students who have not gotten it? In a traditional face-to-face classroom, these students may require individual or small group instruction or reteaching. Now, with the use of technology, there's nothing to stop us from recording our feedback to these students, either for the group or individual, for them to revisit and to act on it. And task 1 can be reassigned to them for them to redo, and after which they submit to us to show improved thinking and performance. For this final task, I invite you to put things together by designing an extended feedback model for your subject discipline. Consider the ideas we talked about in feeding up, feeding back, and feeding forward to bring together feedback that is more dialogic, as well as helping AFL succeed in the classroom in your day-to-day teaching. You can find more exemplars here, so post your ideas on Blackboard discussion board.